Aloha, everybody. This is Cathy Bilsky, the Quantum Leap Let Light Unite show on UPR and radio. This is Friday, the 13th, 2022. Well, I hope your Mercury in retrograde time is a smooth one. And if you don't know what Mercury in retrograde is, it's a time when Mercury goes retrograde, kind of goes backwards. It can be an intense time. You can have communication problems. You can have challenges with the car and electrical. They say that don't start anything new in retrograde because when it goes direct, and this time it's not going to go direct, well, June 3rd, give it 3 more days, safely by June 6th. Things can go crazy, and that's relationship, businesses, things like that. Now, it's also a time there you can complete things, especially if something's been started before retrograde. There's a lot of times it brings people into my store in retrograde. I call them the retrograde crowd. Let's see. Yeah, basically that's it. So if things aren't going right and appointments may not come together, that's Mercury in retrograde, and you just got to keep your sense of humor through it all. Now, saying it's Friday the 13th, I thought, gosh, what would be a good story to tell? And my goodness, what came to my mind was the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab. And if you don't know who they are, they're a pretty evil group of people. They're very, I liken to them like a secret society. Klaus Schwab is a Nazi and they want world domination. Their 2030 goal is nobody will own anything and be happy. I don't think so. They want us to eat bugs. They want us to starve. And if you haven't noticed the food distributors going up in flames, you really should plant a garden, guys. And if you go to my YouTube channel, Cathy Bilsky, I also did a little novice container guide on gardening. I'm doing crash course now that I'm living in a place where I've got a huge yard I can turn into a garden. So, there's no reason no one can garden. You can do cheap containers. Go to my YouTube channel and check it out. Okay. So I thought we would talk about the World Economic Forum because you really, really need to know who these people are because they want us as slaves. So I want you to go get your wine, your beer, whatever you're drinking to make you relax. Go smoke that joint with your wine and your beer. And we are going to talk about the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab. So just relax and listen, and we'll begin. So the title of the article, which I love, by the way, is called Staring Evil in the Face, a closer look at the WEF and Klaus Schwab. It is a key strand of our mission to bring you some of the very best writing from the fast-growing freedom movement. Such is the nature of the movement's growth. It includes in its ranks the brightest minds, the most progressive thinkers on the planet, and a war is now raging between the planet's brightest minds versus the planet's most iniquitous. The following featured article is from elkreicher.com, which is well worth a visit for its illuminating history of World War III. The article showcased here gives valuable insight into the subversive group known as the WEF and its sinister and evidently demented frontman, Klaus Schwab. Make no mistake here, we are staring evil in the face, and nobody in their right mind would let these criminals call the shots, for they are simply and emphatically not working in our best interest, but their own. They are, by their modus operandi and intent, criminal cartels whose best interests evidently embrace reducing the likes of you and me and those we care about to expendable, soulless drones, or, in the words of the WEF leading goal setter, Dr. Yuval Noah Haram, I think it's UV, Haram, hackable animals condemned to lifelong servitude to the wealthy elite. So that's what the World Economic Forum thinks of us, okay? The stated mission of the WEF sounds harmless enough, but the long endgame is horrifying if we take them in their word. The World Economic Forum is the international organization for public-private cooperation. In my last article, I explored some of the connections between the tech industry, government, big investments, and central banking that make up what Klaus Schwab, founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, calls public-private cooperation, and showed it to be nothing more than systemic corruption, graft, and corporate welfare. This scenario may often be the case, but there have been times in the past when public-private partnerships have been a great deal more than simple corruption and inefficiency. With the dawn of COVID-19 and the World Economic Forum's announcement of the Great Reset, it is vital to examine the other, much darker side of public-private partnerships. As we'll unfortunately see, there are many reasons to be concerned, alongside those who will call alarmists, about continued progress toward authoritarian dystopia. So this is a dark history of public-private cooperation. At the beginning of the 1930s, pre-war rearmament period in Nazi Germany, Hugo Junkers was the owner of one of the most respected and innovative aircraft manufacturers in Germany. When the Nazis seized power in 1933, Reichskommissar of Aviation Hermann Göring requested Junkers and his business aid in the government rearmament. Junkers declined, to which the Nazis responded by demanding ownership of all patents and market shares from his remaining companies under threat of imprisonment on the grounds of high treason. Junkers was confined to house arrest and died mysteriously the same day Nazi officials visited his home for a round of negotiations to persuade him to give up his company. Very shortly after, his wife, Teresa, seceded all control of the Junkers companies and patents to the Nazis for a tiny fraction of their worth. In public-private cooperation with the Nazis, but without Hugo, the Junkers company went on to design and manufacture the notorious Stuka dive bomber, which wrought havoc over Europe all during World War II. Unlike Junkers, the executives and stockholders of quite a number of companies with still familiar names like Krupp, Bayer, BMW, Daimler, and IG Farben profitably cooperated with the Nazis during the same period. Now, one such company was the Ravensburg, Germany branch of a lesser-known Swiss company, Eicher Weiss AG, whose managing director was one Eugene Schwab, father of Klaus Schwab. I said this was going to be a story, right? Okay. As Johnny Venmore reports for Unlimited Hangout, during this time, Eicher Weiss was the largest employer in Ravensburg. In addition, during the same period, and while Eugene Schwab was chief executive, the Ravensburg factory was awarded the title National Socialist Model Company. This award was not for nothing, as the Ravensburg factory employed forced laborers and even maintained a small special camp for these workers on the factory premises. Specifically for the war effort, Eicherweiss aided the Nazi Wehrmacht in producing significant weapons of war as well as more basic armaments. The Eicherweiss Company was a leader in large turbine technology for hydroelectric dams and power plants, but also they manufactured parts for German fighter planes. Now remember, Klaus Schwab, the creator of the WEF, okay, this is his dad. This is where his dad works. In addition, the company had engineered a 14,500 HP turbine for the North's hydro industrial facilities' strategically important hydroelectric plant at Veermork near Rjukan in Norway. The Norsk hydro plant, powered by Eicherweiss, was the only industrial plant under Nazi control capable of producing heavy water, an ingredient essential for making plutonium for the Nazi atomic bomb program. Allied forces were aware of the potential game-changing developments as revealed by Record Group 226, compiled by the U.S. Office of Strategic Services, the OSS. In 1949, aided by the intelligence, Norwegian resistance forces were able to sink the ship transporting the heavy water to Germany. As Vedmore puts it, with help from Eicherweiss, the Nazis were almost able to change the tides of war and bring about an Axis victory. By 1945, with the defeat of Hitler, there were no more Nazi masters to serve, but no matter. The remaining power vacuum was filled not just by the US and allies, but by the Cold War itself. For Eugene, and later for Klaus, this meant the rise of the military-industrial complex. Cloaked in an appealing veneer of democracy, the MIC, military-industrial complex, was a bigger, new and improved gravy train and far more lucrative than Nazi Germany ever even had the potential of becoming. It exported its violence far from Europe to places like Vietnam, and it was growing. Eugene's career continued to advance. By 1966, after Klaus had become of age, Eugene, his dad, was president of the Ravensburg Chamber of Commerce and involved in the founding of a committee for the construction of a railway tunnel connecting Switzerland with Italy. This particular tunnel was never constructed, but his comments regarding the committee show that he was likely a strong influence on Klaus in terms of world philosophy. He defined this committee as a project that creates a better and faster connection for large circles in our ever increasingly converging Europe, and thus offering new opportunities for cultural, economic, and social development. Like Klaus and his concept of stakeholder capitalism, Eugene sought to shape the nature of culture and social interactions and use the state to merge them for for-profit business. Now recall the kinds of cultural and social development with which Eugene had been willing to collaborate during the Nazi era just a short time before. Eugene Schwab inserted himself as a beneficiary of the Nazi war machine, not because he was a Nazi or that he loved war, but because the Nazi war machine was the biggest, most powerful machine available in which to insert himself. By 1967, Klaus Schwab had earned multiple degrees, including a Master of Public Administration from the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. While at Harvard, Schwab was taught by Henry Kissinger. Kissinger would, of course, soon go on to become President Nixon's national security advisor, as well as a notorious war criminal. Klaus, however, later names Kissinger as one of the top 3 to 4 figures who had most influenced his thinking throughout his life. 2 years later, it was Klaus's turn as a director of the newly merged Sulzer Escher-Weiss AG. With his arrival, the company began none other than the illegal proliferation of nuclear weapons technology. Wow. The acorn doesn't fall far from the tree, does it? Again, according to Vedmore, while Schwab was on the board, the company also began playing a critical role in the development of South Africa's illegal nuclear weapons program during the darkest years of the apartheid regime. Klaus Schwab was a leading figure in the founding of a company culture which helped Pretoria build 6 nuclear weapons and partially assemble a 7th. In addition, South Africa had constructed a reactor as part of a plan to produce plutonium, the Safari 2, located in Pelindaba. Safari 2 was part of a project to develop a reactor moderated by heavy water. This linked to developing heavy water for the creation of uranium, like plutonium, the same technology which had been utilized by the Nazis, also with the help of Escher-Weiss, may explain why South Africans initially got Escher-Weiss involved. Clearly, Klaus saw what his father had done and early on and sought to emulate it. Apparently, unsatisfied, however, he sought out and made acquaintances with bigger fish than his father, who had once played nice with the Nazis and gotten away with it. In 1946, Herman J. Abs became a member of the European League for Economic Cooperation. The ELEC's mission was to develop policies on monetary integration, common transport, energy, and welfare systems. Moreover, the ELEC was generally dedicated to the establishment of the European Common Market, which was the precursor of the European Union. In 1948, Abs was put in charge of allocating the funds of the Marshall Plan to fitting recipients in German industry. And in 1949, he became a top financial advisor to Konrad Adenauer, West Germany's first post-war chancellor. By all appearances at this point, Abs was a man of the new progressive, uniting Europe, and just a kind of high-level business leader, an up-and-comer like Klaus would want to rub elbows with. Now let's take a look deeper into Herman's history. In 1937, as the Nazis were expanding their reign of terror into neighboring countries, Abs joined the board of directors at Deutsche Bank, Germany's largest bank. Where have we heard about the Deutsche Bank before? Should we say Scandal City with that one? Laundry, money laundry? Anyway, getting back to Herman. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Okay. Deutsche Bank, Germany's largest bank. It was during this period that Deutsche Bank was tasked with Aryanization of banks in Austria and Czechoslovakia that were owned by Jews. In 1942, as a representative of lender Deutsche Bank, Abbe sat on the boards of 40 companies. A quarter of these were Nazi-occupied countries like the Eicherweiss used slave labor. By 1943, Deutsche Bank wealth had quadrupled. One of the boards on which Hermann Abbe served was none other than I.G. Farben, whose subsidiary, De Gesch, was the supplier of the cyanide gas Cyclone B used in the gas chambers at Auschwitz and other death camps. Unlike many of his I.G. Farben colleagues who claimed ignorance, received acquittals or light sentences, and went on to respectable post-war industrial careers, Abbe, despite being arrested by the British in 1945, was never prosecuted for war crimes. He later returned to Deutsche Bank as chairman of the board, and as we've seen, became one of the most important figures in Germany's post-war reconstruction. Finally, in 1971, after witnessing a winning formula of public-private partnership carried out by his father, Klaus Schwab created a global outfit whose sole purpose was to promote the same formula over and over again between governments and politically connected corporate movers and shakers. The inaugural European Management Symposium, later to be known as the World Economic Forum, was held in Davos, Switzerland, in January of that year. After a successful first gathering, the following year's symposium promised to be even better. But unfortunately for Klaus, the meeting chairman, Hermann J. Abbe, chairman of Deutsche Bank and the most prominent European business leader at that time, had to cancel his participation at short notice. So what? Plenty of so-called public-private partnerships have existed in the U.S. before and since World War II. In fact, they've been on all corners of the globe ever since there have been governments. Many consider them wasteful and unproductive, but we don't usually think of them as horrifying or as above. History shows that they certainly can be lived with. Besides, progressives believe in all kinds of reasons why they're beneficial. So why be so concerned about Klaus Schwab's father and his peripheral role in a long-defeated regime, and whether Klaus may have learned a thing or two from him? We don't live in that world anymore. We've moved on. We have moved on, indeed. In Klaus Schwab's own words, we stand on the brink of a technological revolution that will fundamentally alter the way we live, work, and relate to one another in its scale, scope, and complexity. The transformation will be unlike anything humankind has experienced before. He is describing what he and the crowd that jets into Davos called the Fourth Industrial Revolution. He continues, the first industrial revolution used water and steam power to mechanize production. The second used electrical power to create mass production. The third used electronics and information technology to automate production. Now, a fourth industrial revolution is building on the third, the digital revolution that has been occurring since the middle of the last century. It is characterized by a fusion of technologies that is blurring the lines between physical, digital, and biological spheres. And he lists us a number of emerging technologies, such as artificial intelligence, robotics, the Internet of Things, autonomous vehicles, 3D printing, nanotechnology, biotechnology, material science, energy storage, and quantum computing. And the speed of current breakthroughs has no historical precedent. When compared with previous industrial revolutions, the fourth is evolving at an exponential rather than a linear pace. Moreover, it is disrupting almost every industry in every country. And the breadth and depth of the changes herald the transformation of entire systems of production, management, and governance. He tells us that the kind of impact current technology changes will have in our lives and the economy is nothing like we've ever seen, and implies that as individuals, we are ill-equipped to face its challenges. In his 2017 book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution, Schwab writes, about 47% of total employment in the US is at risk, perhaps over the next decade or two, characterized by a much broader scope of job description and a much faster pace than labor market shifts experienced in previous industrial revolutions. In his 2018 book, Shaping the Fourth Industrial Revolution, Schwab writes, we will become better able to manipulate our own genes and those of our children. These developments raise profound questions. Where do we draw the line between human and machine? What does it mean to be human? You know, I really wonder here if Klaus's father and mother actually dropped Klaus on his head a few times. All right, so he's pondering of what it means to be human. So who is we? Somebody might become better at manipulating my genes and those of my children, but it doesn't really seem to include me. Do you plan to become better at manipulating your own genes? Takes a lot of know-how. Good luck. Collectivists like Schwab's use of the word we can be both hypnotic and absurd. And fourth industrial revolution technologies therefore appear to be undermining humans' choice and ability to apply their skills and interests to meaningful work. Schwab's words, and may lead to generations of workers living precarious and fragmented lives. Navigating these shifts will require new regulations for non-standard work, investments in adult learning, and proactive employment services. All right, let me give you an example before I go into this. Okay, do you remember at one time when we would make calls on the phone and we would want information, or, you know, even when you had to call a company, you would get like a human voice. And now all we're getting are what they call AI. And this is a recorded voice, you know, it's very irritating. And that replaced humans from answering. And, you know, no matter what they do with that AI, and, you know, and it takes us down so many roads and gets so aggravating because, okay, you know, tell me your name. Okay, press 1, press 2, and then they keep taking us to another place. And if you want to actually get help, you still have got to talk to a human. A human helps. But my point was, all that replaced humans. Okay, all those humans that were answering the phone, gone. So now these people who invented this felt really, really bad, and now started encouraging companies to try to employ people because they're being replaced. Well, these other companies, why do they want to replace? Why would they want to hire humans when they plan on replacing everybody with robots? All right, but this is their mind, okay? You know, they think they're doing something really good for other companies, saving them money, but they're screwing humans over and they don't care about that. All right, now getting back to Klaus. He certainly sounds like he knows what he's talking about. Is he right? Is this the future? Maybe. But in light of all we know about Klaus Schwab, assuming all of these changes come to pass, isn't it equally important to ask who benefits? Klaus tells us who should benefit. Why, everyone, of course. All the stakeholders need to be brought together in new forms of 21st century global governance, imbued with a new leadership mindset to ensure all the new technologies are designed with our collective values built in from the start. This way, the externalities of the fourth industrial revolution can be adequately managed, and the promise of the new technological era can be incorporated in the smart cities and bridge the digital divide to the remotest parts of the planet for the benefit of the most isolated of people. So by everybody, he literally means everybody. Okay, but besides everybody, who benefits? Among the listed founding partners of the WEF Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution are who? Salesforce. Now, a little fun fact about Salesforce. Mark Benoit, who actually owns Salesforce, also owns Time Magazine, and Time Magazine is the biggest PR for the Great Reset. You know, they are their promoter, and they do a lot of articles on them. Anyway, let's read on with the rest of the companies. Accenture, Deloitte, Facebook, Hitachi, Huawei, McKinsey, Microsoft, Mitsubishi, Palantir, Visa, Gavi, and the Vaccine Alliance, and Netflix. God, I'm so glad I got on Netflix. The major stockholders and executives of these companies are just a few of the stakeholders in stockholders in the fourth revolution. Stakeholders like these are the important ones because they are the ones who pay Klaus Schwab handsomely to do what he does. And that's just the private side of public-private corporation. When writing about the fourth revolution, the WEF devotes an enormous amount of print and online real estate to not just issues of privacy, but also enormous amount of to our collective values. These are areas for the public side of the partnership. Schwab would tell us that the role of the public side is to see that the needs and concerns of all stakeholders are heard. You might as well say stakeholders / billionaires. He also envisions a regulatory environment that is accommodating to changing and unforeseen needs. Yeah. There is, however, one characteristic of the public side of the public-private partnership without which it would be useless to Schwab and all the entities above, and that's the government monopoly on the use of force and the threat thereof. More specifically, then, my question is, who benefits from the use of government force in the name of the fourth industrial revolution? In a World Economic Forum white paper entitled Reimagining Regulation for the Age of AI, New Zealand Pilot Project, the author states, modern regulatory domains are so complex that they can no longer be handled by the state alone. A modern regulatory body is not authoritarian, but one part of a broader system that influences and steers through a full spectrum of approaches. Harder regulatory powers may be useful in certain situations, while soft approaches will work better in others. A lack of experience can be solved through giving the group the ability to call on expert advice when it's needed. Other challenges are more complex. Too narrow or specific a scope may work against regulators in areas of fast-moving technology, Some regulators, such as the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, have deliberately brought in remits that are intended to future-proof if the field moves in unforeseen directions, which means whatever they wrote is very vague. The companies mentioned above and countless like them don't only devote significant time and financial resources to the World Economic Forum, but also millions of dollars to the campaigns of politicians and their parties, as well as to lobbyists who write the legislation that regulates them. We are taught to believe that the purpose of government regulation is protect consumers and the public from nefarious or dangerous business activity. And in some cases, perhaps it actually does. But when it's the most effective, it provides a government-enforced monopoly to a small cartel. It's an old game. In the US, it goes back to at least to the first transcontinental railroads. This is accomplished with regulations written by industry lobbyists themselves, so expensive to implement that only the biggest and most politically established corporations can afford to implement them. All other competition is driven out. And what about situations where soft approaches will work better? One timely private-public partnership to highlight these days is the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccines, particularly when it comes to vaccine mandates. There were no widespread government-enforced mandates until the Comirnaty vaccine by the WEF partner Pfizer was approved or used for use by the FDA. Who benefits from this rapid approval? For Pfizer's sake, it was a good thing the soft approach option when it's available, as well as broad remit, otherwise more scrutiny of its safety and effective would have been required. Now, I'm just reading you a little part of history. Whether it's true or not, I want you to go ahead and look it up yourself. I don't want to get in trouble with the censors again. It's important to note that the current Pfizer board and the WEF member, Scott Gottlieb, MD, served as FDA commissioner from 2017 to 2019. These kind of connections are frequently referred to as the revolving door when the WEF talks about soft approaches and says a modern regulatory body is not authoritarian. It seems to me not authoritarian toward the interests of the companies with the most legislative and regulatory clout, whereas it may be quite authoritarian to countless others like those who are vaccinated against their will to the benefit of Pfizer. So let's quickly decode the WEF. Again, in Klaus Schwab's 2018 book, Shaping the Fourth Industrial Revolution, he provides his wish list for a world dominated by such things as AI, quantum computing, and biotech. Several quotes are demonstrative of a graft agenda in the guise of concern for the well-being of humanity. A lot can be learned if one cares to read between the lines using history and the WEF actions as a guide. All technologies are political. Technologies are solutions, products, and implements that are developed through social process, stand in for people and institutions, and contain within them a whole set of assumptions, values, and principles that in turn can and do affect power structure and status in society. The fact that different cultures and types of values highlight differences in priorities shouldn't be a roadblock to thinking through a value-based approach to technologies. On the contrary, the more we think it through, the better we will become, understanding which priorities are critical for societies and how technology affects and mediates these values. Current disruptions are forcing political leaders to rethink the paradigm that reshapes the relations among society, individual, and economic activity. This includes considering reforms for reshaping the social contract between individual and society. We must seek to share the benefits of this technological age among all citizens, regardless of age, income, race, or beliefs. He references the WEF white paper. In the white paper entitled A New Social Covenant, the World Economic Forum Global Agenda Council of Values 2012 to 2014 identified a broad consensus across cultures, religions, and philosophy on some shared human aspirations, which together represents a powerful unifying ideal of valued individuals committed to one another and respected of future generations. He quotes from a New Social Covenant, many previous efforts have focused on individual rights, which are essential, but our focus is on what we owe to one another, both within nations and among nations. There is great culture diversity when it comes to values, but also there is broad consensus across cultures, religions, and philosophy on some shared human aspiration. The importance of a common good that transcends individual interests. Now, here's how I interpret what I just read above. Not just anyone possessing the know-how should be allowed to develop new technology. New technology needs to be controlled and kept within the right hands, preferably members of the WEF who are qualified to ascertain the correct assumptions, values, and principles that preserve the correct center of the power structure and status, and which prioritizes are critical for societies. The rights of individuals are an impediment to bottom lines of WEF members. Everybody needs what we're selling, and we'll use the taxes and newly printed money from your government to make sure you get it. The clearest, most sinister, and disingenuous tell that stakeholder capitalism is a scam is Klaus Schwab's advocacy of universal basic income. We can leave aside all economic arguments for or against universal basic income. In his advocacy, Schwab is showing himself and the activities of the WEF to be that of a wolf in sheep's clothing. Again, in shaping the forced industrial revolution, Klaus writes, current disruptions are forcing political leaders to rethink the paradigm that reshapes the retaliations amongst individual society and economic activity. This includes considering reforms for reshaping the social contract between individual and society. The discussion of a universal basic income is one example of this conversation. The primary justification for this is social justice, as income increasingly goes toward land, natural resources, and intellectual property. All parts of society is collective wealth. Everybody should have a modest share of this collective wealth in the form of unconditional basic incomes. Now, you know darn well that this does not include the upper class, the billionaires, and anybody who's a part of the WEF. Well, all right, a little while longer. Okay, the process of, as he says, comes increasingly going toward land, natural resources, and intellectual property is demonstrably the result of central bank policies. Here it is worth mentioning that central banks are government-enforced cartels of private banks with monopoly authority to issue legal tender currency. In the June 5th, 2021 article, Can the Great Reset Succeed and Does It Matter? I pointed out of 31 members of the WEF Board of Trustees, 13 represent high-level banking interests from the US, UK, EU, Canada, Japan, Russia, and China. 10 of the 13 hold and have held high-level government and central banking positions in and out of their respective countries. In addition, 8 WEF board members are high-level investment firm executives. In an inflationary environment of artificially low interest rates and inflated money supply, those who receive the new money first will quickly use it to artificially build up the prices of assets, concentrating that wealth into fewer and fewer hands and make it nearly impossible for ordinary people to save for the future. The membership and high governance of the WEF is made up of the central and commercial bankers who create the new money out of nothing, and those with the greatest capacity to borrow it and turn it into assets like land, natural resources, and intellectual property. In addition, asset bubbles are created by the policy of these actors, allowing them to snatch up assets for pennies on the dollar, including homes from the individuals who are bankrupted when those bubbles finally burst. We saw this in 1999, 2008, and most recently with the COVID lockdowns. Under Schwab's vision, the same central banking scam is to go to such extreme that it eliminates people's ability to make a living. And the UBI is required to keep the population pacified and compliant with the program. One can connect the events of 2008 with the incestuous relationship between Congress, the Treasury, the Fed, the world's largest banking, investment banks, and the World Economic Forum by looking at the crisis caused by the government lockdowns of 2020 and the government response. Wow. All right. You know what? I'm going to have to continue this next week. I want to do a little bit energy work directed to these guys. All right. So what I want you to do, we're going to create a bubble of light. I'm going to put this energy work in this bubble. Whew, and I want you to give it energy, and in your mind's eye, see this actually happening. All right, so take a deep breath. We're going to create this bubble of light. In this bubble of light, we're going to put Klaus Schwab and everyone that's connected with the WEF, the young global leaders, they're global leaders, everyone connected with the WEF. We're going to call to Michael the Archangel to come forth and cut all ties between them, cut all ties between any oaths, vows, curses, rituals they have done to each other, to others. And off of each one of them, see them pull their energy back. And as they pull their energy off of each other and off of the people they've manipulated, see everyone, all these beings become more conscious. And let there be much infighting. Let there be a lot of, this is Mercury in retrograde. If it can go wrong, let it go wrong. So we're going to call these guys to step forward in the light. And if they choose to continue what they're doing, which is their free will, we ask their higher selves and their guardian angels to put them in a position of harmlessness. I surround them in a bubble of mirror. It faces them. It's 2 inches from their nose. As long as they do that dark work, that energy stays contained in that bubble. I'm going to add the violet flame to transmute that energy so they have no more forward movement. Let this bubble of mirror be up 24/7, 365 days a year, from now through eternity. We're going to cut ties between the WEF and the UN and the WHO. Let there be, again, much infighting, much disagreement, so the WHO's programs cannot go through. Now, if it is for the WEF, all their CEOs, their young global leaders, if it's for their highest good, that their karma comes back to them now for their evil works, their evil intent, their manipulation, what is happening now on the planet, including people starving. If it's for their highest good, that their karma comes back to them over 1,000,000-fold now, I step aside and let it be returned. Let it hit them from every direction, every place, everywhere, especially Mercury in retrograde, until they decide to work for good. And I want all dark energy veils removed from them. That's keeping them from reconnecting to the Creator and becoming an awakened spiritual being. And when they do, as they become awakened, they start working for humanity instead of against. All right, fill that bubble with lots of energy. We're going to take a deep breath and release it. I give thanks for this opportunity to serve. Oh, well, that's it for the show tonight. Thank you for tuning in. And I'm going to ask that anybody that listens to this program later on, especially the energy work, that this energy work is amplified over 100,000 fold. This is Cathy Bilsky, the Quantum Leap Let Light Unite show on UPRN Radio. Thanks for tuning in. And we're going to talk a little bit more on the WEF and Klaus Schwab and that whole group, because it's really important that we know who they are, and never underestimate the enemy, guys. And they are not our friends. They are the enemy. They are the ones that want to take everything from us. We will own nothing and be happy. They want us to eat bugs and imitation meat. They don't want us to be healthy. And that's the dark road. That's the dark timeline. Keep your focus on enlightenment. And look, if there's anybody out there that's interested in working on another world enlightenment event, say something down below in the comments and let's do it. We need another event, don't you think? So thanks for tuning in and listening to the WEF Klaus Schwab story. And I hope that didn't bore you too much. This is Cathy Bilsky, the Quantum Leap Let Light Unite show on UPRN Radio. And again, this is Friday, the 13th, 2022. We'll see you next week. Remember, Mercury's in retrograde. We are going into the full moon, so watch your words. And, go slow and, go with the wind and don't get upset when things don't go your way. All right. Aloha.